Hi everyone, I'm Paige Abbott, registered psychologist at Sana Psychological in the province of Alberta. Quick disclaimer that self-help materials, including videos like these, are not a substitute for professional assessment and treatment, but they are a complement. If you are really struggling or in distress or having a difficult time, I would strongly recommend that you reach out and connect to a healthcare provider in your local area who can provide proper support to you at this time. I'm really excited to make this video. I feel like it's been sort of a long time in the making because today what I want to talk about is basically how I approach counseling and services with people. And over the years I've found it has a lot of value for people. I'm not certainly by any means saying that my approach is unique. This is based on lots of different data and evidence of how our brains work and how therapy and change works. But I've kind of pulled pieces from different research, different modalities to kind of put it together in a way that when I explain it to clients, it seems to make sense to them. So we're not going to go through some boring, dry neuroscience and psychological discussion that's not going to have a lot of value for you. I am going to try to break things down in a way that makes sense for anybody, whether you have a background in understanding human anatomy and physiology or not. So what I want to start off by talking about, because this probably will go over multiple videos over time, is I want to start off by talking about the Sly Fox part of the brain. My daughter was gracious enough to loan some of her stuffed animals to me for the making of these videos. For today's video, we'll only meet the Sly Fox, and next time we'll be introduced to the sweet, soulful alpaca. And what I'm using these to describe and mimic is the different parts of our brain. Now, obviously, when I say the two different parts of our brain, the Sly Fox and the sweet alpaca, who we'll meet next time. Of course, there's many more different components to our brain than that. Our brain is a very complex, intricate place. There's a lot going on, but there's a few key elements that I really want people to understand so that they can have a better appreciation of what is going on in their brain and behavior, and or in a loved one's brain and behavior. So what does this Sly Fox represent? Well, he looks really cute as a stuffy, but in terms of what that can look like in our minds, it can be very sly and very controlling, very sneaky, and have some devastating consequences to people, because this fox is meant to represent our reward circuitry, the part of our brain that tells us when to do something and when not to do something. And when we're doing something, it also is the part that tells us when to do more of it. So it's the part of our brains that basically gives us our red light, our green light, in terms of life behaviors, feelings, thoughts, all of it. So what happens when we engage with something? What happens is that our brain has a response to that. And depending on what it is that we're doing or thinking or feeling, our brain gets different amounts of the neurotransmitter called dopamine. Now, there are other neurotransmitters involved in this process. Again, to break it down to a very fundamental level, we'll focus primarily on the reward circuitry of the brain and that neurotransmitter called dopamine. So dopamine is the neurotransmitter that clues and cues our brain into telling us exactly that, when we need to do more of something and when we need to do less of something. Things that come with stronger amounts of dopamine, our brain codes as needing to do more of that. Now, this is where sometimes people can get confused and get lost, because there's a difference between what our brain codes as having that strong dopamine response and wanting to do more of, versus what we subjectively feel is healthy or appropriate and we want to do more of. Sometimes they're in alignment. Sometimes we also kind of agree and participate in what the brain is coding us to do more of. It fits with our higher moral beliefs, our values, what we want to do and how we want to be living our lives. But sometimes there is a disconnect, and sometimes there's a fundamental disconnect. And that is where people start to experience addiction as well as mental health challenges that can become very impactful to the point of even being debilitating or completely devastating to them. So when we ingest something like alcohol or a drug, or we engage in sexual behavior, or we eat unhealthy foods, things that are high in sodium, high in fat, high in sugar, these are substances that will give a stronger dopamine response just due to their chemical makeup and what happens when they come into our bodies. Now, these are substances that sometimes we also subjectively will say, that was nice, that felt good. That is being taught to us from that dopamine response. But at a certain point, it can go too far. So this sly little fox can get greedy, and he just wants more and more and more of whatever he has been trained to hunt out. So over time, that alcohol, that drug, that food, whatever it happens to be, now all of a sudden the brain is still saying, we need this, and we need more of it, in fact, to keep that strong dopamine response going. Subjectively, the person is going, I don't want this. I'm tired of this. This doesn't feel good. It's ruining my life. And this can start to create the disconnect between where people are at, what they're doing, and how they're functioning in their daily lives, and what they want and intend to be doing. And I can't emphasize enough how important this is for people to know and understand. It may not seem like a big thing or a big deal, but I personally have found it to be profound for individuals in just learning how to understand and therefore work with that part of their brain. So now people can be more aware of when and how much this sly fox within is being fed. And obviously we want to try and take away some of that fuel and some of that energy that's going into this sly fox's mouth, because again, there's no satisfying this little guy. He may look sparkly and cute, but really he is that sly fox. So he's got lots of tricks, lots of tools to keep himself being fed. And if we take away one of the main things that's been feeding him, whether that's, again, alcohol or drugs or gambling or shopping excessively, sex, exercise, workaholism, whatever it is that we realize this guy's having a little bit too much of for our liking, we take steps to take that away. That's a significant thing to do. I would never say that it's not. However, that's not where your personal growth work can stop. Because if you remove that one thing, but keep these other sources of fuel going, guess what? They're still going into this little guy's mouth. He's still being fed. So you may have taken away his alcohol. That's not going in. But there's still food, unhealthy food. There's still sex. There's still marijuana. There's still some gambling. There's still shame. There's still pain. There's still self-pity. There's still thoughts of past things that generate a lot of feelings. All of those are going into the same vessel that the alcohol or whatever you had removed was going into before. So what this sets up is a bit of a problem, a lot of a problem, because it can lead people, eventually, this little fox can say, well, all that other stuff is good, but that one thing that we used to do back there, it was better. So that leads the fox to turn back in that old direction and seek out that former source of dopamine. Or what it can set up is he does become satisfied with the new behaviors, the new substances that are being engaged with, and that becomes enough for the sly fox to say, okay, I'm satisfied with that. But now problems with that new behavior or substance take off because, again, it's going into that same reward circuitry, that same vessel of the brain that led us to some devastating consequences with that other substance or behavior. So how do we move forward in a healthy way? Well, this is where sometimes people can feel a bit discouraged, and I would really encourage you to not look at it in a discouraging or despairing way, but rather a hopeful way, that there's actually a lot that you can do on a daily and a regular basis to quiet down this little guy and kind of give him less power and less influence over your life. He'll still try, and that's the slyness of that reward circuit of the brain. It's never going to stop trying. It's been coded and programmed to look for dopamine, and the stronger the dose, the more that response of we need to do this and we need to do more of this. That's a basic biological fact. That's never going to stop completely, but we can then take some ownership over what and when and how much we're giving to that part of the brain. So what that means is that there will be certain substances, certain behaviors, certain things that you will know, and we just know from biological research that when we engage with them, they give that strong surge of dopamine. So things like alcohol, any kind of drug, whether it's an over-the-counter drug, can sometimes have that effect. So you'll have to talk with your doctor about what's safe there for you. And certainly illicit drugs, as well as things like marijuana. They all participate in that reward circuitry of the brain, stronger than sitting and staring out the window at the sun, taking a walk in nature, making a meal for yourself. So we're trying to capture what gives the more excessive or stronger dopamine response and trying to take some energy away from that. Cigarettes, nicotine, caffeine, sugar, fat, salt. These are all other things that literally when we consume them create that stronger reward response and therefore can set that part of the brain up, this little guy, to become more active and to become more hungry again. And that's where people will start to experience cravings, and that's where life can start to become a bit unmanageable for them. I'll share even a personal example for myself. I don't identify as having addiction. My brain hasn't seemed to have crossed that pickle line, but I am definitely aware I come from a family where there's addiction, and I'm definitely vulnerable. And I've experienced that many times over the years where I can feel my brain, and it's this guy, this part of the brain, that's pulling me kind of closer and closer. So an example that always stands out for me is when I was in, must have been like first year of university. I was off on summer break, and I was really enjoying reading this book called The Story of Psychology by Morton Hunt. I'm a psychology nerd, what can I say? And it really was engaging me in just learning a little bit more about the history of my field. But I was really enjoying reading that book, and I would sit down and I would read that book after lunch while my family kind of went off and worked, because they worked in the home. So I'd sit down. I remember it being beautiful summer, sunny days, and just sitting and having a nice read of this book in the living room. One of the days I decided, it might be kind of nice to have a soda while I'm reading this book. So I got myself a glass of some soda, drank that, and then was reading the book. Second day, I thought, might be kind of nice to do the same. That was a nice thing that I did yesterday. So I got the soda, sat down, read the book. Day 3, I didn't want the soda. It wasn't something that I felt was going to be advantageous or helpful. I just wanted to go and enjoy some time after lunch. I don't think I even wanted to read the book either. I was going to go off and do something different, but I noticed that already on that third day, guess what? Same time, same place, this fox spoke up and said, that Pepsi, that soda would be really nice. And I knew at that point, I thought, uh-oh, this is trouble. This Sly Fox Brain of mine, it's trying to suck me in. Probably sucked me in yesterday on day 2. probably sucked me in on day one. And I do not want to participate in that, because if I go with day 3, it'll be day 4, it'll be day 5, and who knows what day it'll be before I can finally get some wiggle room from this fox part of my brain. So I didn't have the soda. And I'll admit, I remember it wasn't easy. My brain wanted it. My brain was craving it. I could almost taste it. It was salivating. There was that vulnerability there. But I was able to move away, and I'm grateful for that, because I know that there's a lot of people who can't, that they become attached, and that attachment grows. Now, obviously, sometimes this is going to happen and we're not aware, and that's okay. There's nothing that you can do about that. But once you do become aware, it is important to be honest with yourself about what's happening in the brain and the role that this sly fox is playing in that reward circuit of your brain, and what steps that you can take to mitigate what's going on there. So for many people, that will involve looking honestly and rigorously at their lives, what they're engaging with that is likely adding and fueling that stronger dopamine response, and trying to draw some boundaries and move away from those behaviors. So this is where often some clients think I'm probably a bit of a killjoy, not letting them have fun with certain things, because it is the recommendation to move away from as much of those dopamine responders as possible, because then we're not putting as much fuel and energy into the mouth of this reward circuit, and therefore it helps to protect us in other parts of life. So this can involve looking at your relationship with caffeine, with nicotine, with any drugs, including prescription medications. Things like sleeping pills, things with codeine, things like that can have a pretty strong effect on this same part of the brain. So you have to be very careful, and again, talk with a healthcare provider, a physician, about what is going on there and if that's safe for you. Look at your relationship with alcohol, with gambling. These are all things that we technically do not need to survive. Perhaps some of the prescription medications, but hopefully there's some options available to you that can be taken that are not as reinforcing of this reward circuit of the brain. Now, with other things like food, sex, work, relationships, spending, exercise, anything really, any hobbies, any activities, these are all things that the reward circuit of the brain can start to approach in a more obsessive, excessive, compulsive way, and even though they have healthy intention, they become destructive. We may not be able to remove these completely from our lives, because we need them to some degree and extent, but then we need to look at what parts of those behaviors are healthy and helpful for us and which parts are not. Again, as I had said earlier, there's so much to talk about here. At this point, I would just encourage you to take a few minutes to digest what I shared in this video. So have thought about those different parts of the brain, and just observe your own experience in life to reflect on, do you feel that this sly fox part of the brain, which is the reward circuit, is maybe quite active? And if so, where would you identify it's active? What are the behaviors, things, substances, people that you find your brain craving? And then the next step of reflection, perhaps doing some journaling or discussion with somebody about it, would be to explore, what are you willing to do about it? What changes are you willing to make to try to take away some fuel and some energy from this part of the brain? And as I had said in future videos, I hope to also bring in this guy. So this is the alpaca, which is meant to represent that core part of self. So there's this sly fox, the reward circuit. Some people refer to these as the devil and the angel, the bad side and the good side, you know, those sorts of words. Jekyll and Hyde, those sorts of languages. And if that resonates for you, that's okay. I just wanted to bring in something very visual. You can remember these cute little faces. You can remember the Sly Fox face, and you can remember the rainbow alpaca face, because this figure is meant to represent you. So it's your core soul, your core personhood, your core personality, which parts of it, of course, are rooted in the brain as well. And that's why I said earlier, this is a complex thing. This is a very gross oversimplification, but just meant to help give you some understanding of what's going on internally. Over time, the main name of the game is we want to give as less and less fuel, an unhealthy fuel, to this Sly Fox as possible. And we want to nurture and nourish this side. We want to nurture and nourish that healthy core part of self so that this side is more dominant, this side is quieter in the background. This part is never going to go away, but neither is this side. So if you find yourself in a situation where it's the opposite, the Sly Fox is more active than the alpaca, that happens. That's when addiction, mental health issues have taken over. It feels like they've taken over the core part of you, but guess what? That core part of you is still there. So there's always hope and there's always opportunity to quiet this, pull it more into the background, and have this part of self shine through. So in future, we're going to talk more about this side of things and how to bring forward that core, healthy, natural part of self. But it starts with taking away some of the fuel and the energy from the Sly Fox. He's sneaky. He's got a lot of tools at his disposal. He's always thinking. He's always planning. He's very patient. He's happy to wait as long as he knows that there's going to be that pounce, that kill, that reward at the end of it. So we have to know what we're dealing with. So I hope that this video helped to give you some idea of what you and or your loved ones may be dealing with. There's a lot of work and exploration that can be done here. And again, you may benefit from some professional assistance in doing this work to have an objective and neutral outsider go through your daily life with you. What's happening that might be providing more energy to that reward circuit than you're aware of, and then that can help to develop a plan of action for steps that you can take to remove those sources of fuel from them. I thank you so much for joining me on this video. I know it was a longer one and I appreciate you sticking it out. Maybe you paused and came back. I hope this is something you maybe come back to multiple times because it does take a while to really sink in and to really resonate for people. And depending on where you're at in your journey, some parts of what I discussed today may stand out more than others. You might not be ready to hear some of it. You might not agree with it. That's totally okay. This is just a perspective that hopefully can help you in your growth and your personal development journey. So thank you so much for watching and take care, and I will talk to you soon.